Hello, my name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, then welcome to my channel, and today's video is going to be my August 2022 reading wrap-up. So I've been talking about this a lot on my channel recently, but yeah, not a great month for my reading slump. It tried to destroy nearly every book that I tried to read or tried to start this month, but that all being said, we do thankfully have some pretty great stuff to talk about today. And the content warnings for everything that I talk about today will be linked down below in the description, and we are going to be going in the order that I read these in for the most part, and let's go ahead and get into it. So we're going to start this video off by talking about some manga because that's what I started the month with, and the first of those is Demon Slayer Volume 3. If you don't know, this follows our main character Tanjiro, who is striving to become a demon slayer after his family is murdered by a demon and his sister is turned into a demon. So I am currently caught up to the anime of this, so being back at the beginning of the series definitely does feel like a recap of sorts for me, but it's also nice to revisit because it has been a while. I also really love the art style and a lot of the characters. This one specifically kind of focuses in on a character that I don't love, but for the most part it has been a really great time. I'm excited to keep reading this series, and I'm especially excited to get to the new stuff that I haven't encountered in the anime yet. So next up is Chainsaw Man Volume 3 and Volume 4. I read Volume 4 a little later in the month, but I don't remember my feelings on like the volumes individually, so we're just going to talk about them both now. So this follows our main character Denji after he makes a contract with a dog-like devil who then fuses with him, which allows him to turn parts of his body into chainsaws. So I originally picked up this series due to the hype, and it took me like a minute to get into it, but it's been happening more and more with each volume. And I do plan to read a lot more of the volumes very soon because the anime is coming out very soon, and I want to read part 1 of the manga before that comes out. We'll see if that actually happens or not, but I do intend to. This series has to be one of the most violent things I've ever read. It is incredibly dark. There's also some really great humor and character chemistry. I think they play off of each other really well. There's also great use of panels with like the composition. They're used in ways that are both impressive and fun, and in ways that are like, why would you do that to me? Yeah, this is a wild series, and it's been a wild journey so far. There are things about it that I don't necessarily like because they're just things that I never really like, but then there's also a lot that I do really love. There's a lot about the story that does feel really smart, and I just cannot wait to see where things go. And next up is Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, and this is the sequel to Black Sun. These are the first 2 books in the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, and it's a trilogy that is inspired by the civilizations of the pre-Columbian Americas. It takes place in a city called Tova around the time of the winter solstice, which is usually a time for celebration and renewal, or it would be, but the solstice this year is around the same time as a solar eclipse, which according to the Sun Priest signifies an unbalancing of the world. At the same time, a ship begins its adventure toward Tova carrying a seemingly harmless passenger, but the captain does have her suspicions about him. So Black Sun was one of my favorite books that I read last year, and I was super excited to read this sequel because of that. And the first thing that I immediately noticed is that I was much more attached to the characters in this book than I originally thought that I was. Although I did certainly have my favorites, because there were just certain points of view that I preferred, mostly due to what they were doing in the story, because unfortunately I did have some trouble getting into certain parts of the story, and a certain character in particular. And speaking of the story, I loved how much we got to learn about the world and its history. This was something that I've always wanted from this series, and I am so excited that we finally got it. I also do feel like this book did a good job of setting up for the next book. This is not something that's like rare for a middle book to do, and I don't feel like it was too much, but it did disappoint me like slightly for this book's own story. But it did what it needed to do. Even if I was a little bit disappointed, I'm still hyped for the 3rd book. And I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. So next up is Volume 4 of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This follows the story of our main character Charlie, who is an openly gay high school student and kind of like the overthinking type. And then this also follows our other main character Nick, who's a cheerful and soft-hearted rugby player. They become friends very quickly once they meet, and Charlie is falling hard for Nick but just is not sure if he has a chance. I cannot believe that I am caught up to this series. I feel like I put this volume off a little bit because I just liked having more of it around to read, but this was floating around my TBRs for a couple of months, and I had just really missed this series during my time away from it, so it just ended up being time. And of course, I am incredibly happy with that decision. decision. This was a serious volume, so once again, content warnings are down in the description, along with the resources that are listed, I believe, in the back of this book. One of my favorite things about this series is how much the characters just love and support one another, and this was something that was explored a lot in this volume, and I love these characters and the relationships and dynamics just so much. And I say it all the time, but I am really grateful for this series and how much it has been able to just make me smile throughout my time with it. And I ended up giving this 5 stars. And the next book that I finished was Unravel the Dusk by Elizabeth Lim, which is the sequel to Spin the Dawn. Spin the Dawn follows our main character who dresses as a boy and travels to the Summer Palace to achieve her dream of becoming a tailor to the Emperor at the risk of being discovered, as this is not something that women are allowed to do. She and 11 other tailors must compete in a series of challenges in order to prove their artistry and skills. So I read Spin the Dawn back in July, and I got really excited about and invested in where the story was going towards the end of the book, and that is something that I ended up really loving about this book, and I feel like the story was really interesting, especially when it comes to our main character, and also just the political intrigue of the world. That being said, there was one specific part of this book where I didn't enjoy the pacing, and it felt like a significant and important part of the story, and I just thought it came to an end like too abruptly. And I also haven't loved the romance in this series. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. And what I found was that I enjoyed the portions of the story where they weren't on the same page together more than when they were. With one exception for this book specifically. I ended up giving Spin the Dawn like a 3.5 out of 5, and I'm going to be giving this one 4.25 out of 5. And the final book that I finished in the month of August is A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. This is a fantasy inspired by West African folklore, and it follows a princess and a refugee who have this growing attraction towards one another despite being on the course to kill one another. So after the first probably under 100 pages or so of this, my reading slump really took over for like the next portion of the book. I just couldn't get into the story despite reading things that I knew that I liked, and I also didn't think that I liked any of our characters. So I ended up taking a couple of days off from reading, and when I came back, just a completely different experience. And I really began to love and adore one of our main characters' character growth and journey and exploration, and that's something that I enjoyed about this book as a whole. I got super invested in the story, and I liked the way that I was able to slow down and really focus in on and highlight certain scenes. The romance in particular had a lot of scenes that worked for me. There's a complex dynamic, as you can probably tell by the book description. I also really enjoyed the fantasy elements of the story and the setting also does have real life reflected into it as well. I ended up giving this one 4 stars because even when my reading slump was no longer in the way, there were still things that just didn't excite me that much, and there were also things that I wanted to see more of. But I am really looking forward to the sequel because I do think it's going in some really interesting directions. So those are all of the books that I read in the month of August. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and answer the question that'll be around here if you want to do that, and hopefully I will see you here next time. Bye!